I was born on a quiet September morning in 1942 in a small wooden house just outside a little Texas town. My mama always said that the day I came into this world, the air smelled like sweet hay and the sky was so blue you could almost hear it. We weren't a wealthy family, not by a long shot, but birthdays were a big deal to us back then. Mama believed that every child deserved to feel special on the day God chose for them to arrive. She'd bake a small cake, nothing fancy, sometimes just cornbread with a bit of honey drizzled on top, but to me, it felt like a feast. My brothers would go out into the fields and come back with wildflowers, their hands stained with dirt but their eyes full of excitement. Daddy would kiss my head and tell me he was proud of me, even when I was just a little girl with missing teeth and tangled hair. Those birthday mornings were full of warmth. The sun would stream in through the kitchen window, turning the dust in the air into little golden specks. The smell of coffee would drift through the house, mixed with the sweetness of Mama's baking. We didn't have store-bought presents most years. Sometimes Mama would sew me a new dress, or Daddy would whittle me a small toy, but the real gift was the feeling that I mattered. That I was loved. I carried those traditions into my own life when I had children. When Sarah was little, I stayed up late the night before her birthdays, wrapping small gifts in newspaper if we didn't have wrapping paper, and baking her favorite chocolate cake from scratch. When Mark was born, I made sure he had the same joy, balloons if I could afford them, silly little games, and a birthday song sung as loud as we could manage. I told myself, no matter what else happens, they'll always remember their birthdays as happy days. And I believed, without a doubt, that they'd grow up to remember mine, too. But time changes things. People grow up, get busy, move away. You expect that. What you don't expect is for the people you gave your heart to, your children, to forget that you even have a birthday at all. The first time it happened, I told myself it was nothing. Sarah had just had her second baby, and she was exhausted. Mark had recently started a new job, working long hours at a warehouse in Dallas. I figured they'd call me later in the day. That morning, I got up early, put on my nicest dress, and made myself a little breakfast, 2 eggs over easy and toast with strawberry jam. I set the table for one, though it felt strange. Normally, I'd be making space for the grandkids or putting on a pot of chili for visitors. I kept glancing at the phone. It sat there on the counter, stubbornly silent. At 10 a.m., I told myself, it's still early. They're probably just busy. At noon, I thought, maybe they're planning a surprise for later. By 2 p.m., I stopped making excuses. I checked the mailbox, empty, except for an electricity bill and a grocery flyer. No cards. No letters. By evening, I tried to busy myself with chores. I swept the porch, watered the garden, folded laundry that didn't really need folding. I told myself not to sit by the phone anymore, but I kept doing it anyway. I cooked a small dinner, just beans and cornbread, and ate it in silence. The clock ticked louder than usual. Every creak of the house made me think the phone might finally ring. But it didn't. When bedtime came, I climbed under the covers and stared at the ceiling for a while. I thought about calling them myself, but something in me stopped. It felt like if I had to remind them, it wouldn't mean the same. So I let the day slip away. I whispered happy birthday to myself in the dark, the way my mama used to whisper it to me when I was little, and I told myself, they'll remember tomorrow. But they didn't. The next day came and went like any other. No call. No card. No, I'm sorry we forgot. Just silence. And I, being stubborn as an old oak tree, didn't bring it up. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter. It's just a day, I said over and over in my head. But the truth is, it wasn't just a day. It was my day. The one day in the whole year that was supposed to be mine, where someone might stop and say, "We're glad you were born." And the people I loved most had let it pass like it was nothing at all. That night, I made a promise to myself I wouldn't expect anything next year. I'd just let it pass quietly and not get my hopes up. That way, I couldn't be hurt again. Or so I thought. Because, as I was about to learn, forgetting once can be an accident. Forgetting twice starts to feel like a habit. And when that habit stretches into years, well, it changes a person. It starts to teach you how to live without being remembered. And that's a hard lesson for a mother's heart. The next year came around faster than I expected. September seemed to sneak up on me while I was still trying to decide what to plant for spring. As the days grew shorter and the evenings cooler, I felt that old ache in my chest. I told myself I wasn't going to expect anything this time. I'd learned my lesson the year before: no waiting by the phone, no glancing out the window for a car that wouldn't pull into the driveway. I decided I'd make my own celebration. Nothing grand. Just a little cake from the grocery store, a boxed mix, yellow with chocolate frosting, my favorite since I was a girl. I bought a single candle from the dollar store. The young cashier didn't even look up as she rang me through. On the morning of my birthday, I baked that cake, frosted it, and set it on the table. I lit the candle, sang happy birthday softly to myself, and blew it out alone. It felt silly at first, like I was a child playing pretend. But after the flame went out, the kitchen seemed quieter than ever, and I realized I was doing it for more than the tradition. I was doing it to remind myself that I still mattered, even if only to me. The day passed slowly. I spent the afternoon knitting a scarf, something to keep my hands busy and my mind from wandering. I thought about Sarah. She was probably at home, taking care of her little ones, maybe too tired to even notice the date. Mark, I imagined, was somewhere in that noisy warehouse, lifting boxes and checking schedules, too busy to think of his old mama. That's what I told myself anyway. Evening came, and the phone sat silent on the counter. No ring. No message. I went to the mailbox just in case, but there was nothing there except another pile of junk mail. This time, it didn't sting as sharply as before, but the hurt was still there, like a bruise that hadn't quite healed. I didn't cry. I just sat at the table, looking at the half-eaten cake, and thought, so this is how it's going to be now. From then on, I started calling those years the quiet years. They stretched on, one after another, without much change. Each September came and went without a word from my children. Sometimes Sarah would call me in October or November, acting like nothing was wrong. She'd talk about her kids' school projects, her husband's new job, what she was making for Thanksgiving. She never mentioned my birthday. Mark was worse. He'd go months without calling, and when he did, it was usually because he needed something: a recipe, an old family photo, a bit of advice about fixing something around the house. I gave what I could, and I never brought up the forgotten days. I kept sending them cards and little gifts for their birthdays every year. I marked their dates on my calendar in red ink, so I'd never forget. I always called, even if I had to leave a message. Sometimes I wondered if they noticed that I never forgot theirs, or if it just seemed like something I was supposed to do. In those quiet years, I found my own ways to keep from feeling lonely. I spent more time at the church, helping with bake sales and organizing the food pantry. I joined a quilting circle with some of the other ladies in town. We'd sit around a big wooden table in the church basement, stitching and talking about everything from our grandchildren to our aching knees. Most of them still had families who celebrated their birthdays, but they never made me feel left out. In fact, a couple of times, they brought a cake for me after quilting, and we all had a slice with coffee. It wasn't the same as hearing from my children, but it warmed my heart just the same. Still, every year on my birthday, I felt that old tug. I'd try not to think about it, but it was always there, this quiet question in the back of my mind: do they even remember? And if they did, what kept them from picking up the phone? Some nights, when I couldn't sleep, I'd lie there in the dark and wonder if I had done something wrong as a mother. Had I made them feel unloved? Had I not taught them well enough about kindness, about remembering the people who matter? I'd think back on all the birthday parties I'd thrown for them, the nights I stayed up sewing costumes or baking cupcakes for school. I thought about the times I drove for hours to see them in school plays or sports games, even when I had a bad back and could barely sit on the bleachers. I'd given them all I had to give. So why did it feel like they had so little left for me? But then I'd remind myself of something my mama used to say: people don't forget because they stop loving you, they forget because they get caught up in their own lives. It was her way of making sense of a world that sometimes felt careless. Maybe she was right. Maybe my kids still loved me, even if they didn't show it on the one day I needed it most. The quiet years weren't all bad. There were still moments of joy, holidays when we'd get together, laughter around the table, hugs at the door. But those moments were like rain in a long drought, welcome when they came, but never quite enough to fill the dry places. I learned to carry on without expecting too much. I learned how to keep my own company, how to find peace in the small routines of my days, watering the garden, feeding the birds, watching the sunrise over the pasture. But deep down, there was always that small hope, the one I tried so hard to ignore, that one year, they'd remember without being told. That one year, I'd hear the phone ring on that September morning, and it would be their voices saying, "Happy birthday, Mama." Little did I know, that hope would stay buried for a very long time. By the third year, I realized I had learned a new skill, though it wasn't one I ever wanted to master: pretending. Pretending that birthdays didn't matter, pretending that my children's silence didn't sting, pretending that I was just too busy to notice the dates slipping past. Pretending became my way of keeping people from asking questions I didn't want to answer. You see, small towns like mine have a way of noticing things. Folks at church, the ladies at the grocery store, even the man who runs the post office, they pay attention. And if they know your children forgot your birthday, well, it travels faster than wind through the cornfields. I didn't want to be the subject of whispered sympathy. I didn't want anyone looking at me with that soft, pitying expression that says, "Poor thing, she's been forgotten." So I kept my chin up and played my part. On my birthday that year, I got up, put on my Sunday best, and went to the quilting circle at the church. The ladies there, bless their hearts, sang happy birthday and gave me a small card they'd all signed. I laughed, smiled, and acted as though I'd already celebrated with my family. "Oh yes," I said, "Sarah and Mark are just busy right now, but we'll have a little gathering later in the week." The words rolled off my tongue so easily that even I almost believed them. That afternoon, after quilting, I walked to the diner down the road. It's just a small place with faded red booths and a jukebox that hasn't worked since 1999, but it has the best pie you've ever tasted. The waitress, Lucy, was a young thing, maybe in her early 20s, with freckles and a smile that could melt butter. She saw me come in, and without asking, she brought me a slice of pecan pie with extra whipped cream. "On the house, Miss Ellen," she said. "For your birthday." I didn't tell her there wouldn't be any other cake that day. I didn't tell her that her pie was the only sweet thing I'd have to mark the occasion. I just thanked her, took small bites, and let the sugar and kindness warm me from the inside out. As the years rolled by, the pretending got easier, but it never felt good. I became a master of redirecting conversations. If someone asked about my birthday, I'd change the subject. If someone asked if the kids had called, I'd smile and say, "Oh, they're so busy these days," and then talk about the weather or the garden or the price of gas. But pretending has a way of eating at you. It's like holding a heavy box all day. You can keep it steady, but your arms start to ache after a while. Some nights, after putting on that cheerful mask all day, I'd come home, close the door, and feel the weight of it all. The house seemed quieter after I'd been smiling in public. That's when the truth would sneak in, that ache in my heart, the loneliness I tried to ignore. I remember one particular year, maybe the 5th or 6th one they forgot. It was raining hard that morning, the kind of steady Texas rain that makes the air smell like wet earth and the tin roof hum like a lullaby. I stayed inside all day, knitting in my old rocking chair by the window. I didn't bother baking a cake. I didn't even go to the diner. I told myself, it's just another day, Ellen. Just another day. But when evening came, I found myself lighting a single candle I'd pulled from the kitchen drawer. No cake, just the candle stuck into a biscuit I'd made for supper. I lit it, closed my eyes, and whispered a wish I'd been making for years, let them remember next year. Then I blew it out, the smoke curling up into the dim light of the kitchen. Pretending also meant keeping my disappointment hidden from Sarah and Mark. When we did talk, usually weeks or months later, I acted as though nothing had happened. If I mentioned my birthday at all, it was only to say something like, "I had a nice day," or "It was quiet, just how I like it." I thought maybe if I downplayed it, they wouldn't feel guilty. Or maybe I was just afraid that if I told them the truth, they'd get defensive, and we'd end up fighting. I didn't want to lose what little connection we had left. But deep down, I knew I was lying to them and to myself. The truth was, I did care. I cared every single year. I cared when I saw my neighbor's children bringing her flowers on her birthday. I cared when the church bulletin listed members' birthdays and I saw people getting hugs and cards after Sunday service. I cared when I walked past the card aisle at the grocery store and saw other folks picking out something special for their mamas. Still, I kept pretending. It was easier than admitting how much it hurt. It was easier than facing the possibility that maybe they didn't care as much as I hoped they did. One day, during one of our rare phone calls, Sarah mentioned her friend's birthday party. She said she'd spent the whole weekend baking and decorating and helping her friend's kids make cards. I smiled and told her it sounded wonderful, but my chest felt tight. I wanted to ask, "And why couldn't you do that for me?" But I didn't. I just said, "That's nice, dear," and let the conversation drift to other things. That's what pretending does. It teaches you how to hide the cracks in your heart so no one sees them. But just because people can't see them doesn't mean they aren't there. By the time I reached the 8th or 9th year of being forgotten, I'd gotten so used to the act that I didn't even have to think about it anymore. My smiles looked real. My voice didn't waver when I talked about celebrating later or keeping it simple this year. People believed me because I'd gotten good at believing myself. But there was a moment, a small one, that made me realize I couldn't keep pretending forever. It was late summer, just a few weeks before my birthday, and I was in the church kitchen helping set up for a potluck. One of the ladies, Margaret, turned to me and said, "Ellen, I hope your kids make a big fuss over you this year." I opened my mouth to answer, but for the first time, I couldn't get the words out. I felt my throat tighten and my eyes sting. I just nodded and busied myself with arranging the pies. That tiny crack in my mask made me wonder how much longer I could keep it on. And as it turned out, the mask wouldn't need to stay on much longer, because the 10th year was coming, and with it, something I never expected. The 10th year started like any other. September in Texas is a strange time. The mornings can feel like the edge of autumn, but by afternoon the sun is still hot enough to make you sweat. My little house sat quiet on the edge of town, the porch creaking whenever the wind came through. I had no big plans for my birthday, and after 9 years of being forgotten, I'd trained myself not to expect any. I figured it would be another day of keeping busy, another quiet evening with maybe a book and some tea. But there was something different about that year, though I didn't see it right away. Looking back now, I think it started a couple weeks before my birthday, when I found an old photo album tucked behind a stack of sewing patterns in the closet. The cover was dusty, the leather worn soft from years of handling. Inside were pictures of Sarah and Mark when they were little, Sarah in her Sunday dress, holding a doll almost as big as she was, and Mark grinning with 2 missing front teeth, holding up a crayon drawing he'd made for me. One photo stopped me in my tracks. It was from my 50th birthday. The kids had thrown me a little surprise party in the backyard. I was sitting at a table with a chocolate cake in front of me, laughing as Sarah tried to light the candles and Mark made faces at the camera. I remembered the sound of their laughter, the smell of the cake, the feeling of being loved so openly. For a long time, I just sat there with the album open, my hand resting on that page, wondering how things had changed so much. As the days passed, I kept thinking about that picture. Part of me felt a deep ache, the kind that comes from missing something you once had. But another part of me, a part one hadn't listened to in years, started whispering, maybe it's not too late. I didn't quite know what that meant, but it stayed in my mind. Then, 3 days before my birthday, the phone rang. It was Sarah. I could hear noise in the background, maybe traffic or people talking, and her voice was rushed. "Hey, Mom," she said. "I'm just calling to check in." "How's everything?" "Everything's fine, dear," I said, keeping my voice steady. We talked about the weather, her work, a bit about Mark. She didn't mention my birthday, and I didn't bring it up. Old habits die hard. But something in her tone made me pause. Before hanging up, she said, "Love you, Mom," in a way that felt softer than usual. The day before my birthday, I went into town to pick up some groceries. At the post office, the clerk handed me a small envelope. My first thought was that it might be a church notice or a letter from one of the quilting ladies. But when I looked at the handwriting, my heart skipped. It was Mark's. I didn't open it right there. I wanted to save it for the next day. Still, walking home, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a flicker of hope. On the morning of my birthday, I woke to the sound of rain tapping against the window. I made myself coffee and sat at the kitchen table, the little envelope in front of me. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a card, nothing fancy, just a folded piece of paper with a watercolor flower on the front. Inside, in Mark's messy handwriting, were the words, "Happy birthday, Mom. I know I've been distant, but I'm thinking of you today. I'll call later. Love, Mark." I sat there staring at those words until the letters blurred. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was more than I'd had in nearly a decade. Later that afternoon, the phone rang again. This time, it was Sarah. She sounded different, calmer, more present. "Mom," she said, "I know we haven't done much for your birthday in years, but I wanted to tell you I'm sorry for that." My throat tightened. She went on, "Mark and I have been talking. We forgot how important it is to make time for you. We shouldn't have let that happen." I didn't know what to say. For years, I'd dreamed of hearing something like that, but I'd also told myself it would never come. "Thank you, Sarah," I managed. "That means more to me than you know." That evening, I was washing the dishes when I heard tires crunching on the gravel driveway. I peeked out the window and saw 2 cars parked out front. My heart started to race. The doors opened, and out stepped Sarah, holding a small box, and Mark, carrying a grocery bag. When I opened the door, Sarah hugged me so tightly I almost lost my balance. Mark set the bag down on the counter and started pulling out ingredients. "I figured we'd make you a birthday dinner," he said, smiling in that boyish way he had when he was younger. We spent the next hour cooking together, something we hadn't done in years. Sarah made a salad, Mark grilled some chicken, and I baked a quick peach cobbler from the fruit I had in the fridge. We laughed over old stories, teased each other about our cooking skills, and for the first time in a long time, I felt that old warmth return. After dinner, Sarah handed me the small box. Inside was a silver locket with a tiny picture of the three of us from that birthday in the backyard all those years ago. On the back was engraved, "To Mom, who never stopped loving us." I couldn't hold back the tears then. For years I had carried the weight of being forgotten, telling myself it didn't matter, pretending I was fine. But in that moment, with my children beside me, I realized something: they hadn't stopped loving me. They'd just lost their way. And maybe I'd lost mine too. We stayed up late that night, talking about everything and nothing. When they left, they promised to visit more often, and I believed them. I knew life wasn't suddenly perfect again, but something had shifted. The 10th year had started like any other, but it had ended with something I thought I'd never have again: hope. And sometimes, hope is the best gift of all. The weeks after that 10th birthday felt different. I don't mean in some big, dramatic way, no parades, no constant phone calls, no sudden flood of attention. It was more like the way the air feels after a good rain, fresh and just a little lighter, as if something heavy has finally been washed away. Sarah called me that very next Sunday. Usually, her calls had been quick, just enough to check in before she rushed off to something else. But this time, she stayed on the line for nearly an hour. We talked about her kids' school projects, a new neighbor who'd moved in down the street from her, and even a recipe she wanted to try for Thanksgiving. I found myself laughing more than I had in a long time, not because anything was especially funny, but because I felt at ease. Mark was slower to open up, but he started calling every couple of weeks too. His voice was still rough from years of hard work, but I could hear something softer in it, a little more care, a little less distance. Sometimes he'd just tell me about the repairs he was doing on his truck, or about a fishing trip he'd taken with a friend. Other times, he'd ask about my garden, or if I'd been keeping up with my quilting. Small things, but small things matter when you've had almost nothing for years. One of the first real changes I noticed was at church. My birthday had always been the one day of the year when I'd hoped someone might make a fuss over me. But that year, it was a month later, on a Sunday morning, when I felt it most. I was walking out of the sanctuary when Sarah and her two kids came through the front doors. My grandbabies ran straight to me, throwing their arms around my waist. "Grandma," they shouted, and I could feel their little hearts beating against me. Sarah just smiled and said, "Thought we'd surprise you and come to service with you today." We sat together in the pew, and it felt right. Like maybe the years of empty space between us were slowly being filled in. Afterward, they came back to my house for lunch, and I made sandwiches while the kids played with my old set of wooden blocks. That afternoon, Sarah helped me hang a new curtain in the kitchen, and I realized something: sometimes love comes back in the form of everyday moments, not grand gestures. Mark, on the other hand, showed his change in quieter ways. About a month after my birthday, I went out to the shed to get my lawnmower and found it gone. My first thought was that it had been stolen, but then I noticed a note taped to the wall: "Took it to fix the blade, will bring it back sharpened. Love, Mark." True to his word, he brought it back a few days later, looking cleaner and running smoother than it had in years. We still didn't talk much about the years they'd forgotten me. I suppose none of us wanted to reopen that wound. But there were moments, like when Sarah called me one evening just to ask how my day had been, when I could feel the apology between her words. The holidays that year were the first in a long time where I didn't feel like an afterthought. For Thanksgiving, Sarah invited me to her house. The table was covered in food, and she even made my favorite sweet potato casserole, the kind with the crunchy pecan topping. Mark came too, and for once, we were all in the same room without any tension. We laughed about the old days, teased each other over who made the best cornbread, and when it was time for dessert, Sarah brought out a pumpkin pie with a single candle stuck in it. "It's not your birthday," she said with a grin, "but I figured we missed too many to make up for, so here's one just for fun." It was a silly little thing, but I can't tell you how much it meant. I didn't make a wish when I blew out the candle. I didn't have to. Over the months, my home started to feel less lonely. Sarah and the kids stopped by more often, sometimes just for a cup of tea, sometimes for dinner. Mark would bring me fresh vegetables from a roadside stand he liked, or he'd come by to fix something that had been broken for ages. And I realized something important: love doesn't always arrive in the way you imagine it. It doesn't always come wrapped up in parties or gifts or big speeches. Sometimes, it comes in the sound of a phone ringing when you thought it would stay silent. Or in a lawnmower that runs smoother than it did before. By spring, I found myself planting extra rows in the garden, not because I needed the food, but because I wanted to have more to give them when they visited. The tomatoes, the green beans, the peaches, they were my way of saying, "I remember you. I care for you." One evening, as I was sitting on the porch watching the sun dip low over the fields, Mark pulled up in his truck. He sat beside me without saying much for a while. Then, out of the blue, he said, "Mom, I don't know why it took me so long to come back around. But I'm here now." I looked at him, at that same boyish face I'd once kissed goodnight 1,000 times, and said, "That's all that matters." It wasn't about erasing the years we'd lost, we couldn't do that. It was about making sure we didn't lose any more. And from that day forward, I stopped counting the years they'd forgotten me, and started counting the moments we were building together again. It was the summer after everything started changing when the idea came to me. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping my morning coffee, when I realized that my birthday didn't have to be the only day I hoped for. For 10 years I'd been hanging all my expectations on one date, and when that date passed without a word, it felt like the whole year was ruined. But maybe, just maybe, we could make something new, something that was ours alone, not on a calendar, not forgotten, and not tied to anyone's guilt. The next time Sarah called, I floated the idea. What if we had a just us day once a year? I said. No gifts, no reason, just a day we spend together, all of us, no matter what. She laughed. You mean like a second birthday? Not quite, I said. More like a reminder that we're still here for each other. Could be a picnic, could be dinner, could be anything. She liked the idea, but she warned me that Mark might be harder to convince. You know how he is, she said. If it's not in his work schedule, it doesn't exist. Still, when I called him, he surprised me. Yeah, I'm in, he said without hesitation. As long as you don't make me wear one of those silly party hats. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the phone. No hats, I promised. We settled on the first Saturday in August. It was far enough from my September birthday that it wouldn't feel like a replacement, and the weather would still be warm enough for outdoor things. I decided I'd host the first one at my place. I spent the week before in a kind of happy whirlwind. I cleaned the house from top to bottom, pulled weeds from the garden, and baked 3 pies, 1 apple, 1 peach, and 1 chocolate cream for Mark, who'd never been much of a fruit dessert person. I set up a big wooden table out under the oak tree in the backyard, covering it with an old patchwork quilt I'd made years ago. The morning of our first Just a Stay, I woke up before the sun, too excited to sleep. The air was warm already, and the sky was streaked pink and gold. I put a pot of coffee on, then stood at the kitchen window, waiting for the first sign of them. Sarah arrived first, with her 2 kids bouncing out of the car before she even had it in park. They ran up the porch steps and hugged me so tight I thought I might tip over. "Grandma, we brought lemonade," they shouted, holding up a jug like it was treasure. Mark came about 20 minutes later, carrying a bag of charcoal and a cooler. "Thought we'd do some burgers," he said, already heading for the grill. The whole day felt easy. No one was rushing off, no one was distracted. We ate until we couldn't move, then we sat under the tree talking about old family stories. The kids played tag around the yard, their laughter floating through the air. Sarah helped me pick a few tomatoes from the garden, while Mark fixed the loose board on my porch without me even asking. At one point, Sarah leaned over and said quietly, "I like this. It feels right." And it did. For once, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something that might not come. I was in the middle of it, the voices, the smells of food on the grill, the warmth of the summer air, the sight of my family all in one place. As the sun started dipping low, the kids pulled out sparklers I'd stashed away from the 4th of July. We lit them and waved them around until the sparks faded into the night. Before they left, I made them promise that we'd do it again next year, same time, same place. They all agreed. That first year was just the start. Every August after that, we made Just a Stay happen, no matter what. Sometimes it was at my house, sometimes at Sarah's, and once we even went to the lake and spent the whole day swimming and eating sandwiches on the shore. There were years when the kids had school projects or Mark had a tight work schedule, but somehow they made the time. And each time, I felt that old empty place in my heart shrinking just a little more. It didn't erase the 10 years they'd forgotten my birthday. Nothing could. But it gave us something new to hold on to, something we built together. And in a way, that mattered more than trying to rewrite the past. The best part? Just a Stay became something they talked about without me having to remind them. The kids would start asking in July what we were going to do that year. Mark would call me a week before to check what he should bring. Sarah would plan a new recipe to try, just for fun. One year, when I wasn't feeling well, I told them maybe we should cancel. But they wouldn't hear of it. They showed up at my house anyway, carrying all the food, setting up everything themselves. They told me to sit on the porch and rest while they took care of it all. And I did. I sat there, watching them work together, and thought to myself, this is what love looks like when it grows back. And so, every August, no matter what life throws at us, we make it happen. Not because it's written on a card or because anyone feels guilty, but because we want to. Because we choose to. And that, I think, is the greatest gift they could give me, the choice to be together, not out of obligation, but out of love. Sometimes I sit on my porch in the evening, rocking gently and listening to the crickets, and I think about those 10 long years when my birthday came and went without a word. Back then, I used to imagine that if I could just have one perfect day, one celebration where everyone remembered me, it would fill that hollow place inside. But now I know that's not how life works. A single day can't mend a decade of silence. Healing comes slower, in smaller pieces, in moments you don't always notice at the time. I think about how much I used to dread September. I'd wake up that morning with a knot in my stomach, trying not to hope, because hope had become too painful. I'd pretend it was just another day, but deep down, I always waited for the phone to ring. When it didn't, I'd go to bed feeling smaller somehow, like I mattered less in the world. Looking back, I realized that my pain wasn't just about the birthday itself, it was about feeling invisible. Forgotten. Like I had faded into the background of my own family's life. That kind of loneliness is heavy, and it seeps into everything you do. But when Sarah showed up that year, when she and Mark began calling again, it wasn't just the attention that healed me. It was the proof that love can still return, even after being lost for so long. They didn't make big speeches or promise they'd never forget again. They simply showed up, over and over, in the ways they could. And over time, I learned to trust that they would. Just Day became more than just a tradition. It became a symbol, a promise that we were choosing each other. That we weren't letting the busyness of life steal away our connection again. And each year, as we gathered around a table, whether it was covered in quilts or picnic blankets, I felt that knot in my heart loosen a little more. I've also learned something important about forgiveness. It's not a single moment when you decide, all right, I'm over it now. It's a choice you make again and again. There were times, even after they came back into my life, when I'd feel a twinge of the old hurt. Maybe it was when Sarah mentioned a trip she'd taken without thinking to invite me, or when Mark forgot to call one week. But instead of letting those moments open the old wound, I reminded myself of all the ways they'd been showing up. I reminded myself that love isn't perfect, but it's still love. Now, when I tell this story, people sometimes ask if I wish I could go back and change those 10 years. My answer surprises them. No, I wouldn't. Because those years taught me the value of being remembered, of being seen. They taught me to cherish every small kindness, every phone call, every unexpected visit. If I'd never known what it was like to feel forgotten, I might not appreciate as deeply what it means to be chosen again. And you know what? I think my children learned something too. They saw that relationships can survive even after mistakes, that it's never too late to reach out, that a door left open can still be walked through. They learned that love isn't just a feeling, it's an action. It's charcoal for the grill, a pie on the table, a lawnmower blade sharpened without being asked. Last year, during Just Day, Sarah's oldest, my granddaughter Lily, asked me, "Grandma, will we still do this when I'm grown up?" I smiled at her and said, "That's up to you, honey. But I hope you do, because traditions like this keep families together." She thought about it for a moment, then said, "I will. I promise." And maybe that's how this story will carry on, long after I'm gone. Maybe one day, they'll gather without me, but they'll still laugh under the same oak tree, still share food and stories, still take the time to see each other. And maybe, just maybe, no one will ever have to feel forgotten again. So now, when September comes around, I don't dread it anymore. I still celebrate my birthday, sometimes with a cake, sometimes with just a quiet cup of coffee and a slice of toast. But the difference is, I don't hang all my happiness on it. I have August now. I have Just Day. I have phone calls and surprise visits and the sound of my grandchildren's laughter ringing through my yard. And most of all, I have peace. Because I've learned that love is not measured in the number of candles on a cake, or the size of the party, or how perfectly anyone remembers the date. Love is measured in the ways we keep showing up for each other, in the choice, day after day, to say, "I see you. You matter to me." That's my story. My true story, from Texas. They forgot my birthday for 10 years. But in the end, they remembered something far more important. They remembered me.